few weeks ago, the retro gaming scene exploded with news that Sega would be releasing an official HD Genesis as an answer to Nintendo's own mini consoles, and then immediately imploded when word got out that AtGames would be creating the system. That's led a lot of those outside of the community to ask, what's so bad about AtGames? Let me introduce to you the pride and joy of my entire collection, the Sega Genesis Classic game console. The Genesis Classic comes packed with 2 controllers, 81 games, and a small form factor. Word of mouth has been hard on this little box, but let's see how it stacks up against the new breed of clone consoles we've seen crashing the party lately. First thing to talk about is build quality. It's incredibly light in hand, and that doesn't bode well for quality. The controllers aren't the worst thing in the world, but they're definitely not what I'd call comfortable. The buttons are small and somewhat squarish. Just look at how far the Z button juts out. Luckily, the Classic allows for official Genesis controllers to be plugged into their place, which makes the whole experience a little easier on your hands. Unfortunately, there's not much that can be done for your eyes. For the sake of bringing a little more beauty into this world, I'll be using HD retrovision cables for contrasting Genesis footage in this review. To be fair though, the Classic never stood a chance in this regard. With composite being its only output, it was never going to win any pageants. In all honesty, the image isn't that bad when compared to the ugly footage you get out of an original Genesis via composite. In fact, the Classic might even handle rainbow banding better than the Geni. Maybe not. These gripes are hardly going to matter if you're playing on a small screen like this 480p LCD, or even, ideally, a CRT. One thing that did stand out to me was some strange stationary objects on menu screens and in some games. That's something new. But what do looks matter in the end? It's the games that count, right? The Genesis Classic boasts 81 titles out of the box, and it does have a number of Genesis gems, including Alex Kidd, Altered Beast, Comic Zone, Eternal Champions, Golden Axe, Mortal Kombat, Phantasy Star 2, Shining Force, Sonic the Hedgehog, Vector Man, and more. Yeah, more is where AtGames starts to clown us. Among these bonus games, as they call them, you get such masterpieces as Cross the Road, Plumbing Contest, Mr. Balls, Fight or Lose, Whack-A-Wolf, Hidden Agenda, Dinosaur Puzzle, Dominant Amber, and Meatloaf Rotation. Meatloaf Rotation. Okay, I think I understand. You just rotate the numbers. Is there a point to this game? Am I making any progress? How many points do I have? Where's the next level? I'm gonna watch the tutorial. Yep, you literally just move from one screen to another. That's it. While I'm sure the other packed-in games are stone cold classics, I'll leave it to you to try Mr. Balls. So we've established that the selection isn't bad, minus the bonus games. How do the included titles actually play on the Genesis Classic? As far as controls go, things could be worse. There's a good deal of lag and some occasional stutter, but those are things anyone who's familiar with emulation has seen to some extent. It mostly feels like playing a Genesis. I emphasize mostly because there seems to be some input detection issues. I've never been the world's best Sonic player, but some of the circus antics I'm reduced to on the Classic are at a whole different level. There's also something more subtle going on here that seemingly throws off the physics of the game, if that's even possible. On a real Genesis, I stuck this landing the first time. It doesn't even seem doable on the Classic. These sorts of control issues are really only going to plague you if you're playing fast platformers. Old school RPG and turn-based strategy games should play just fine. Is it going to be as good as playing them on the Genesis? Not even close. But there is a variety of solid Genesis games on here that are fairly playable. For comparison's sake, here's a look at a few games on the Classic running side by side with original hardware. Yeah, it could be worse. Just a reminder that the visual leap on the Genesis is largely due to the HD retrovision component cables. Control-wise, mileage is going to vary for most folks. Beyond the gameplay element, one of the most glaring issues to crop up is the audio. on with the sound. Some titles hit reasonably close to the mark, while others... For a few of the titles on the list, the music is close enough to remind you of your childhood, but off enough to almost wreck your enjoyment of the games. Nothing can spoil the killer tracks on NHL 94 though. Speaking of NHL 94, that's not included in the pack-in games. One benefit that the Genesis Classic has over Nintendo's mini consoles is that it's compatible with original carts, meaning any titles that aren't included out of the box can be played without the need to hack or mod your system. Now let's get back to the music. That's my jam! Speaking of jam, not every cartridge that I tried works with the Classic. At first, I thought that maybe the system couldn't play carts of games that aren't already included. But then again... I need to cut myself off. Another curiosity I had was whether the Genesis Classic would run games any better off the cart than they do out of the box. Unfortunately, the same lag and stutter that we saw a few minutes ago carries over to the playing of pack-in games off their respective carts. Having said that, there's a big collection of Genesis titles on the Classic itself, and the ability to run games from carts creates added value. In every review you have to reach a verdict. Is the product worth the asking price? In this case, that depends. I got my Genesis Classic at a local thrift store for an easy $25. If I'd been asked to pay the going rate of $50, I probably would have walked on by. That being said, we've hit on some of the upsides to the Genesis Classic game console. If only that it introduced me to a few gems that I now want to pick up and play on a real Genesis. For the right buyer, at a low dollar amount, could almost recommend the Classic. At its $50 asking price, I've gotta say pass. I don't think the Genesis Classic is as bad as it's made out to be, but there's definitely a real reason for fans to be worried about this year's Genesis clone. At the end of the day, I sincerely hope that AtGames proves us all wrong and knocks it out of the park with the Mini. Thanks again for watching, everybody. Have a good one.